For nearly 500 years, on one of the coldest and most forgotten edges of the world, a Viking society thrived. They built farms, churches, and even a cathedral, carving out a life on the frozen coast of medieval Greenland. And then everything changed. One day the settlement stood silent, homes abandoned, livestock wandering free, and not a single person left behind. No bodies, no battle, no final message. So what happened to them? Where did the Norse Greenlanders go? The flowering of medieval Greenland. Scandinavian explorers led by Eric the Red settled Greenland in the late 10th century, and their descendants flourished there for hundreds of years as farmers and hunters. The largest community of Viking-age Greenland, known as the Eastern Settlement, was in the extreme southwest and consisted of about 500 farms. At its peak, it even boasted its own bishop and cathedral. Hundreds of kilometers north was the smaller, more marginal Western Settlement, near present-day Nuuk. The Western Settlement consisted of about 90 scattered farmsteads but was closer to Disco Bay, where the Norse obtained walrus ivory, medieval Greenland's most prized export. Almost immediately, Greenland became a base for wider exploration. Norse sagas tell of lands discovered beyond Greenland, such as Helluland, Markland, and Vinland, now thought to correspond to Baffin Island, Labrador, and areas near the Gulf of St. Lawrence, respectively. The Norse did not permanently settle in any of these new lands, but they continued to visit Markland, Labrador, until at least 1347, probably to collect timber. The Scandinavian world had never been wider. The Norse, however, were not the only people living in Greenland during their 500 years there. Early on, they found the remnants of an Arctic people known as the Dorset culture, who may have moved north before the Europeans arrived. In their later centuries in Greenland, the Norse came into contact with the Thule culture, the ancestors of modern Inuit. The mystery of the Western Settlement. While the Norse and Inuit sometimes coexisted peacefully, there are signs of trouble. In the mid-1300s, a Norwegian church administrator named Ivar Bardarson was living in Greenland, and he heard that the Inuit had overrun the Western Settlement. Ivar led a group from the Eastern Settlement to drive them away, but when he got to the Western Settlement, he found something shocking. No Norse and no Inuit, only livestock running free. Disturbed by what he found, or rather, what he did not find, Ivar and his companions fled back to the Eastern Settlement. Ivar's enigmatic report was influential among historians for centuries, who took it at face value that the Inuit had wiped out the Western Settlement. However, the account is only preserved in later versions that may not accurately represent Ivar's findings, and not all of its details make sense. Ivar only mentioned visiting a single site, the wealthy Sandnes farmstead, with no indication that he visited any of the other farms. Even more perplexing is the presence of livestock still doing fine, even the cows, which have never fared particularly well in Greenland. Modern archaeologists and historians have scrutinized Ivar's account. Ivar was in Greenland from the 1340s to 1360s, but some Western settlement sites show signs of occupation until nearly 1400. Historian Kurtzen Seaver has proposed that the Western Settlement Norse actually went into hiding when they heard Ivar was on his way. After all, Ivar was a powerful, foreign church official whose purpose was to assess Greenland's churches and their ability to tithe. In other words, rather than being wiped out, the Western Settlement's wealthiest residents may have been hiding from the tax man. Another possibility is that some Western settlement sites were abandoned by the time Ivar got there, but others survived for another generation or two. Why Ivar seemingly failed to visit any of them is a mystery. Either way, by the late 1300s, the Western Settlement was no more. The final stages of Norse Greenland. After Ivar Bardarson's time, there were signs of trouble in the surviving Eastern Settlement. In 1378, Greenland's bishop, Alf, died. The Greenlanders often waited years for new bishops to arrive from Norway, but they had no way of knowing Alf was their last one. From 1378 on, none of the bishops of Norse Greenland Sea, Gardar, actually traveled to Greenland. A visitor from Iceland in the mid-1380s found that Gardar was headed by an old priest in the absence of a bishop. More trouble came in 1379, when the Icelandic annals report that the Inuit killed 18 Norse Greenlanders. A significant figure considering that Norse Greenland had only a few thousand people at its peak. By 1400, Greenland had lost its bishop and one of its two main settlements. Despite these hardships, the eastern settlement carried on for at least another couple of decades after the western settlement was deserted. Our last written record of the eastern settlement involves a ship of Icelanders who visited between 1406 and 1410. They reported that in 1407, a Greenlander named Colgrim was burned at the stake for using witchcraft to seduce a married woman. In 1408, they reported happier, more mundane news. Two of the Icelanders got married at beautiful H. Valsey Church, the ruins of which are still plainly visible today. The Icelanders arrived back home in 1410. That is the last news we have of Norse Greenland. If the eastern settlement was in serious decline by 1410, the Icelanders did not say anything about it. Their final story implied everything was normal. The marriage had been celebrated according to all the proper customs and was officiated by priests. Even the burning of Colgrim does not reveal anything unique about Norse Greenland. Witch burning occurred in late medieval and early modern societies that decidedly did not collapse. When did Norse Greenland end? So if Norse Greenlanders were still alive and well in 1410, when did they disappear? Historians' estimates have changed with time. In the early 20th century, archaeologist Paul Norland reasoned they were alive as late as 1480, based on the discovery of a Burgundian cap that resembled styles popular in 15th century Europe. Due to this finding, 20th century historians often reason that Norse Greenland persisted into the late 1400s, and that they clearly still had some contact with the outside world. In 1971, Finn Gad could confidently say that parts of the eastern settlement were occupied after 1480. In the 1990s, Kirsten Seaver speculated that some Norse Greenlanders could have been alive in 1500. However, when the Burgundian cap was radiocarbon dated, it came back over 100 years too early for this to be the case. A date near 1500 began to appear increasingly unlikely, and some recent historians have taken a hard turn in the opposite direction. Arnv Negvitny has argued that the Norse died out almost immediately after the Icelanders left in 1410, as there is no hard proof that they existed beyond this point. That said, some of the clothes from the eastern settlement have fairly late dates, including one dress radiocarbon dated to 1430, plus or minus 15 years, that was buried with a Norse woman. When the woman in the dress died, there were obviously still people left to bury her. When did those people die? Today, most historians place the termination of Norse Greenland around roughly 1450. Many causes, but no smoking gun. The proposed causes of Norse Greenland's decline have also changed dramatically over time. In the colonial era, Ivar Bardarsson's tale of an Inuit overrun was taken literally. In the late 20th century, climate change became a leading theory, as evidence began to mount that the North Atlantic region became stormier, less predictable, and colder in the later Middle Ages. When Eric the Red had settled Greenland in the late 10th century, it was just as warm as it is today, if not a bit warmer, but within a few hundred years, it had grown drastically colder. This trend is sometimes referred to as the Little Ice Age. and several books and documentaries have noted Norse Greenland's disappearance as the climate turned nastier. Perhaps for a farming and hunting society that had always existed on the margins, prolonged cold spells and unpredictable seasons were simply too much to overcome. Theories of environmental destruction went hand in hand with the focus on climate change, advanced in the academic world by historians such as Thomas McGovern, and popularized for a wide audience in Jared Diamond's controversial bestseller, Collapse. Diamond was particularly harsh toward the Norse for their alleged failure to adapt to the worsening climate, pointing to their preference for trendy European fashions instead of pragmatic Inuit clothing. Diamond also blamed the Norse for failing to adopt Inuit hunting methods and for harming their Arctic environment through overgrazing. However, experts, even McGovern, have pushed back against Diamond's accusation that the Norse failed to adapt. Early on, the Norse obtained just 20% of their food from the sea and 80% from the land. But by the end of the colonies, the ratio had reversed, as even Diamond acknowledges. Likewise, the Norse were careful not to overhunt seals and gave pastures time to recover. Their famous but risky walrus hunts were also an example of making full use of their new environment, as walrus ivory was a valuable trade commodity. Norse Greenlanders were also still making their voyages to Markland, Labrador in present-day Canada, to collect wood as late as 1347, when a boat from Markland blew off course and landed in Iceland. Rather than failing to adapt, the Norse seem to have gone to extreme efforts to obtain resources, while also drastically changing their diet. Norse Greenland may have also become more isolated from Europe toward the end of the medieval period. Medieval Greenland had been peripheral even in the best of times, but Norway made it illegal to trade in Greenland without royal permission. An official Greenland Norse ship provided regular contact between Norway and Greenland for a time, but it sank in 1369. From then on, all sailings to Greenland were accidental, although historians think this is just the excuse sailors used when returning from illicit trade in Greenland. Still, from 1369 on, there were only 4 known sailings to Norse Greenland. Even though there were likely more visits than we have record of, Greenland's economy took a hit when elephant ivory entered the market, making walrus ivory less valuable. When Bishop Alf died in 1378 and no one arrived to replace him, Greenland lost one more connection to the European world. Even the church could not reach Greenland after this point, although there were still remnants of the old priesthood noted in 1385 and 1408. What happened when the last validly ordained priest died? Papal documents from 1448 and 1493 mention pirate attacks and decaying Christianity in Greenland, although the 1493 letter concedes that no one had gone there in 80 years, so it is unclear how they came to this conclusion. For what it is worth, Greenlanders were buried with crosses right up until the end, but it was just one more way the colonies had become a forgotten and neglected part of the medieval world. Perhaps by the early 1400s, when the climate near Greenland was at its worst, sailing there was simply too dangerous. As early as the mid-1200s, a source known as the King's Mirror warned that due to sea ice, Greenland should be approached from the south and southwest, which differed from the traditional direct route. 100 years later, Ivar Bardarsson similarly advised that sailing to Greenland via the old routes had become extremely dangerous due to encroaching sea ice. If the climate had deteriorated that much by the mid-1200s and 1300s, how much worse had it grown by 1400? With all these causes in mind, how did the end play out in practice? This is where evidence gives way to conjecture and speculation. No one really knows what the death blow was, or if there even was one. Perhaps the Norse slowly immigrated to Europe, a slow trickle of tattered refugees who went unnoticed by chroniclers. Maybe the last Norse Greenlanders died at sea trying to escape, leaving no trace whatsoever. Maybe Ivar Bardarsson and Inuit legends are correct that warfare between the Norse and the Inuit weakened the colonies. Maybe there is some truth to the rumors of pirate attacks, or maybe the end came slowly and painfully, with the Norse starving to death one by one. No one can say for sure. A success story. Today, historians avoid ascribing Norse Greenland's disappearance to a single cause. All of the above is an increasingly appealing answer. It is reasonable to say that Norse Greenland's demise was due to some combination of climate change, increasing isolation, and economic factors. The Norse did, however, adapt as best they could to these hardships. Perhaps the biggest surprise about Norse Greenland is not that it vanished, but that it managed to survive in such a harsh environment for nearly 500 years in the face of overwhelming difficulties. Children's Crusade. The so-called Children's Crusade of 1212 CE was a popular double religious movement led by a French youth, Stephen of Cloyes, and a German boy, Nicholas of Cologne, who gathered two armies of perhaps 20,000 children, adolescents, and adults with the hopelessly optimistic objective of bettering the failures of the professional Crusader armies and capturing Jerusalem for Christendom. Traveling across Europe, the would-be Crusaders perhaps reached Genoa but had no funds to pay for their passage to the Levant. While some participants simply returned home, a large number were sold into slavery, according to the legend. Whatever the exact events of the confused history of the Children's Crusade, the episode illustrates that there was a popular sympathy for the Crusade movement amongst the common people. And it was not just nobles and knights who felt compelled to take the cross and defend Christians and their sacred places in the Holy Land during the Middle Ages. Objective Jerusalem. Saladin, the Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria, R. 1174-1193 CE, had shocked the Christian world when he captured Jerusalem in 1187 CE. Despite the failure of the Third Crusade, 1180-71192 CE, to then even get in touching distance of Jerusalem, and the even more dismal Fourth Crusade, 1202-1204 CE, which had instead attacked Constantinople, there were still many Christians in the West eager to travel to the Holy Land and help in the task of retaking Jerusalem. There was perhaps, too, a frustration among the ordinary populace that despite the taxes they were asked to bear, and the sacrifices in materials and supplies to repeatedly furnish Crusader armies, the primary objective of retaking the Holy City had still not been achieved. In 1212 CE, a curious movement sprang up which has since gained legendary status. Thousands of children were organized into an army, and they set out for the Middle East thinking that they could do a whole lot better than the adults in defeating the Muslim infidels. Stephen and Nicholas. In the spring of 1212 CE, in the region of Vendôme in France, groups of youths claimed to have experienced visions which prompted them to set off and fight the Muslims in order to regain Jerusalem. Their leader was one Stephen of Cloyes, a shepherd. According to the legend, Stephen had approached King Philip II of France, R. 1180-1223 CE, claiming, while tending his flock one day, to have miraculously received a letter from the hands of Jesus Christ. The letter instructed Stephen to go forth and preach the crusade, gathering followers wherever he went. The king dismissed these claims and Stephen too, but the boy, undeterred, went on a preaching tour of the region anyway, and he began to accumulate a significant number of followers, the majority of whom were children. Also, in 1212 CE, groups of young people gathered in the region of Cologne in Germany. As with northern France, The Low Countries and the Rhineland were also areas where the church had been evangelizing with a passion to garner support for official crusades. In Cologne, a young leader emerged, a local boy called Nicholas, who carried around a Tau cross, which resembles the letter T. Whether the French group influenced the German or vice versa, or whether each was wholly independent of the other is not clear from the medieval sources, which are hopelessly confused, inconsistent, and conflicting on the whole affair. Mobilization. There is some debate as to whether this popular crusading movement was entirely formed by children, as the medieval records are so confused, and the term most often used for the participants, puri, may include children, adolescents, and adults. Indeed, some Norman and Alpine monks recorded that the puri, in this case, included adolescents and old people. Nevertheless, the movement was significant because it involved people not usually so directly connected with crusading. As the historian C. Tyerman here elaborates, accounts indicated that participants came from outside the usual hierarchies of social power: youths, girls, the unmarried, sometimes excluding even widows or economic status, shepherds, plowmen, carters, agricultural workers, and rural artisans without a settled stake in land or community, rootless and mobile. Signs of anti-clericalism and the absence of clerical leadership accentuated this sense of social exclusion. A crusade was typically called by the Pope, who urged rulers, nobility, and professional knights to take up arms in the causes of Christianity. Commoners were generally discouraged from participating, as they did not have the means, skills, or discipline required for such a vast military mobilization across Europe. The Children's Crusade, as it has become known then, was certainly not an official crusade sanctioned by the Church. It is estimated that 20,000 children set off and crossed both Germany and France, either separately or, at one point, joining forces. Medieval sources allow both interpretations, with the aim of reaching the Italian port of Genoa, where they might find ships to take them to the Holy Land. Some groups may have made their way to the alternative ports of Pisa further south, Marseille in southern France, or even Brindisi in the south of Italy. Unfortunately, many of the travelers, depending entirely on charity wherever they went, died of hunger crossing the Italian Alps, and when the remainder arrived at Genoa, they had no funds to pay for their passage, so that, without any military equipment or training, the Genoese refused to help. In some versions of the legend, the children had optimistically expected the Mediterranean, like the Red Sea for Moses, to miraculously open and allow them to pass through to the Levant. After neither the miracle or the offer of material help by the Genoese was forthcoming, some of the children, almost certainly a small minority, trudged home. What exactly happened to the remainder has been lost in the legends created by later medieval writers and moralists. According to some sources, most of the children were shipped off to Sardinia, Egypt, and even Baghdad, and they're sold into slavery. However, this version of events may have less to do with real events and more to do with the Church's desire to treat the whole affair as a morality tale, a stark warning to others that only crusades with papal authority were ever likely to succeed. Indeed, in some versions of the story, the children made it to Rome, where the Pope promptly told them all to go back home. A rabble of beggars without the means to support themselves, and without the military training and arms to do any good if they ever managed to reach the Holy Land, was of no use to anyone. Aftermath. There would be other such popular crusader movements, notably the Shepherds' Crusades of 1251 and 1320 CE, which, like the Children's Escapade, never managed to leave the shores of Europe. Crusading, especially when traveling to the Holy Land by ship, became the norm instead of the longer and more arduous land route, was, unlike the chaotic early days of the First Crusade, 1095–1102 CE, now a wholly professional movement. The official crusades which immediately followed were the Fifth Crusade, 1217–1221 CE, which attacked Muslim-held cities in North Africa and Egypt, and the Sixth Crusade, 1228–1229 CE, led by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who negotiated control of Jerusalem from Saladin's nephew. Curiously, there is a tradition in one Alpine monastery that Nicholas of Cologne made his way there after the failure to find ships for his followers, and that he did eventually join an official crusade, fighting the Muslims at Damietta on the Nile.